Good morning, July 17th, Friday. I'm Pastor Rusty, and this is your Daily Inspo. Well, I was reading in Mark chapter 9 today, and I was reading about where the father had the son who was taken by a demon, and it cast him into a fire and cast him into the water and tried to kill him. And Jesus asked him, how often has he been doing this? How long? He said, since he was a young child. So that ought to mess with our theology a little bit about demon possession in kids. But nonetheless, moving on, it's an interesting thing because Jesus had been up on Mount Hermon with his 3 disciples, and when he came back, this was what was going on. And everybody was arguing. There were scribes there, and the scribes were arguing with Jesus' disciples, and the disciples had already tried to cast this demon out. Couldn't do it. So Jesus came down, and the guy said, "Are you able? Can you do this?" And Jesus said, all things are possible for one who believes. And the father said, well, I believe, help me in my unbelief. And then everybody come rushing in to watch Jesus do this miracle, and Jesus cast the demon out, and the child convulsed, and he laid there on the ground like he was dead, and then he got him up, and he walked him, and everything was okay. And then Jesus went into the house there near Mount Hermon, probably, where he was staying, and the disciples said, why couldn't we cast it out? And Jesus said, this kind comes only out by prayer. So here we are. The disciples have tried. They couldn't do it. And then Jesus said, this only happens through prayer. And I got to wondering about that today. And I got to thinking, what was going on with the disciples that they weren't able to do that? I understand that, Christ can do anything, but he had given them authority to do these kind of things, and yet it wasn't happening. We read on down a little bit further, and it says, the next day they get up and they leave from probably Mount Hermon on the way back to Capernaum, Jesus' hub of operations. And I don't know, it's 2, 3, 4-day walk. And while they're walking, he's telling them about how the Son of Man must suffer, must die. And he's instructing them all this. He's telling them not to tell anybody. And then it says, when they get to the house, Jesus asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? So from Mount Hermon to Capernaum, the disciples were arguing about something. Well, Jesus says, what was it? They were arguing about who's going to be the greatest. Well, they just had this ultimate failure. They spend time in the backwoods with Christ, walking through, and he's explaining to them how he's going to suffer and how he's going to die. And all the way, they're arguing with each other who's going to be the greatest, which one of them is going to have the most power. And after this ultimate total failure, and I got to thinking, so what's the deal here? I think if you go back and you look at what happened with the demon-possessed child, that the disciples may have gotten a little bit prideful, may have gotten to where they were just going to muster up this power and do this stuff, cast out demons, but they weren't in prayer. Now, that's a possibility. It's my opinion. And I got to think about today, the importance of prayer and the importance of the power and the ability. Jesus says that this ability comes through prayer. This ability comes through the humbleness of seeking God, not your power, not the authority he's given you, but asking him to act on your behalf. And this father says, I believe, but help me in my unbelief. And so he was struggling with belief. The disciples were struggling with prayer. The scribes were trying to catch him in this huge conflict. Jesus had just come down from the Mount of Transfiguration. All this stuff is going on. And I think the disciples simply lost their focus, and they lost ability, because that's what it means. This kind, all things are possible, Jesus says. When he says possible there, he says all things, there's ability, there's possibility, there's these things can happen. But belief, well, when we put our belief in prayer, in God's power, not our power, but in God's power, and we see the potential that he wants to do in us, when we sometimes lose sight of prayer being the connector, prayer being the possibility, prayer being the origin of the power or the ability to do things. And you see, prayer sometimes can slide a little bit back in our focus. Prayer sometimes what can we do without him? Honestly, nothing. The things that we do, we do in our own power, and so many times that's why you see Christians going through burnout. You see Christians who don't stick with it, who don't stay with the stuff, because they got so habitual in their actions and just doing the stuff without honestly seeking God's prayer. I mean, think about it. If we have prayer before we gather on Sunday, prayer for the music ministry, and prayer for the offerings and tithes, and prayer for the Word of God to impact people's lives, and prayer for the preacher to say what is necessary. Prayer, prayer, prayer. You see that? Prayer. Asking, 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 not relying upon ourselves. And we see later on in the story that the disciples had gotten away from prayer. They had gotten on how great they were and which one of them was going to be the greatest in the kingdom. You see their focus was skewed, and they missed the target. And that's something that we can do today. We can aim at the target of being people of prayer and people of God, operating in His power and His power only. Don't let the things of this world, don't let your own abilities cloud the focus, that the focus is Jesus. Keep your eyes upon Him. Watch and see what He does today through you by His power. I'm Pastor Rusty. I'll talk to you tomorrow.